Good morning. This hearing will come to order. Let me just say that my ranking member, Senator Sessions, will be joining us shortly. He's on the floor, and I want to thank him and all of our members who will be joining us off and on throughout this committee hearing today, as well as the members of the public who are here and all those watching online. I particularly want to thank our witnesses today. We have Bruce Lesley, President of First Focus, Margaret Nimmo Crowe, the Acting Executive Director at Voices for Virginia's Children, Shavon Collier, a parent from Edward C. Mazik Parent-Child Center, and her daughter, Sakhia Whitehead, who is with her today, and finally Dr. David Mulhausen. He is a research fellow in empirical policy analysis at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you all so much for being here for this important conversation. As I have often said, despite what you sometimes hear in Washington, D.C., our budgets are about a lot more than abstract numbers and political winners and losers. They are about our country's values and priorities, and they're about our visions for how government should be serving its citizens today and for generations to come. As we move forward with our budget negotiations, it is critical that we keep in mind the individuals and families across the country who are impacted by the decisions that we make. Their values and priorities need to be represented, and their stories need to be told. And there's one group in particular whose voices are not heard often enough when it comes to the federal budget process, and that is our nation's children. They may not be walking the halls of Congress or calling up their senators or strategizing with lobbyists about how to protect funding for their programs, but they deserve a seat at the table, even if they need a booster seat to get here. As First Focus noted in a recent report, our federal government funds over 180 different children's programs, from health care to education, juvenile justice, and nutrition. Their analysis found that spending on children makes up about 8% of the federal budget. So I'm glad we're having this important discussion today about a key group impacted by the budget decisions we make here in Washington, D.C., especially because in recent years, children have been particularly affected by our economic conditions and our fiscal policies. In the wake of the Great Recession, millions of families lost their jobs, their homes, and their livelihoods, and the most vulnerable among us, including our children, were among the most impacted. And now at a time when our economy is recovering, but far too slowly, and when too many American families are struggling with unemployment and underemployment, the automatic cuts of sequestration are hitting children and their families hard in communities across the country. They are being asked to bear a large share of spending cuts, despite the fact that children clearly didn't cause our debt and deficit challenges, and I think that's just simply wrong. In fact, I think it's a national embarrassment, and we need to fix it. We cannot and should not solve our debt and deficit problems on the backs of our children. It's wrong for our kids, and it is not good economic policy. Our children are the next generation of scientists and teachers, inventors and leaders. If we cut out investments in them, we diminish our ability to lay down a foundation for long-term growth and prosperity and risk our position as a global leader in the 21st century economy. When I worked with my colleagues on this committee to write the Senate budget that passed just 2 months ago, one of our highest priorities was investing in programs that would pay off for our country over the long term and ensuring the United States continues to lead for years to come. And I can't think of anything more critical to that goal than protecting our investments in the next generation. As a former preschool teacher, I know that investments in our children are some of the smartest the federal government can make, with some of the highest return on investment, especially when it comes to early childhood education. Just ask Shavon, who's here with us today, about her 2 children who have been on the honor roll since graduating from their Head Start program. Or the single parent that I met at a Head Start facility in Seattle earlier this year. He was able to enroll his young daughter in Head Start, and the results were incredible. Within just a few weeks, he told me she was more engaged and eager to learn. Children in high-quality early education programs are less likely to be held back in school, require special education, engage in criminal activity, or use social safety net programs later in life. They're more likely to graduate from high school and have higher earnings as adults. So if you're looking for an investment that's going to pay off, quality early childhood education is one of the best places you can put your money. We should be investing more in our children, but sequestration right now is really taking us in the wrong direction. Hundreds of thousands of children across the country will lose access to these vital Head Start programs if those automatic cuts continue. For those reasons and for many more, the Senate budget fully replaces sequestration with an equal mix of responsible spending cuts and new revenue from those who can afford it the most. It prioritizes education, including expanding early learning programs, so that we're not unfairly hurting the children that we should be investing in. The House Republican budget takes a very different approach. It doesn't simply accept sequestration, it makes it worse. In order to keep defense spending at the pre-sequester level, it simply shifts the entire burden of the cuts onto children, families, and communities. Their recently released spending levels for education programs come in at 18.8% below sequestration levels. And that does not make sense to me. In fact, I think it's pretty shameful. As Secretary Arne Duncan, who testified in front of this committee last week, said, and I quote, "America cannot win the race for the future without investing in education." We should be investing in and supporting our future leaders so that we can compete and win in the 21st century economy, not slashing funding for programs that help them learn and grow. And it's not just education either. We need to make sure that our kids are getting other kinds of support that they need to grow up to be healthy, successful adults. I know firsthand what a huge impact a strong safety net can have on children when their families fall on hard times. Because when I was growing up, my dad was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. He had to stop working. My mom, who'd stayed home to raise 7 kids, had to take care of him, but she also had to get a job so she could support our entire family. She found some work, but it didn't pay enough to support all of us and a husband with growing medical bills. So without warning, my family fell on very hard times, and I know that the support we got from our government was the difference between 7 kids who might not have graduated from high school or college and the 7 adults we've grown to be today. All college graduates, all working hard, all paying taxes, and all doing our best to contribute back to our communities. Because our government was there to help my family through a very hard time, those 7 kids grew up to be a firefighter, a lawyer, a computer programmer, a sports writer, a homemaker, a middle school teacher, and a United States Senator. I think that was a pretty good investment by our country. Now, I know my family is not unique. Similar stories are told all over this country, in coast to coast, small towns and large towns. So it's critical that we maintain investments in other key safety net programs, like those that provide health care and nutrition and energy and housing assistance to low-income families and children. That is exactly why our Senate budget builds on the reforms of the Affordable Care Act, which mandates that children can no longer be denied health insurance based on pre-existing conditions and requires health insurance coverage to include pediatric services. And the Senate budget protects programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, which prevent hunger and malnutrition and provide healthy food and nutrition education to children and families. Our budget also increases funding for the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program and protects housing assistance programs to make sure all children have access to safe and stable housing. Research has shown that children who have access to programs like those during their formative years are less likely to have health issues, go hungry, or be at risk for developmental delays. The across-the-board cuts of sequestration make deep cuts to programs like that, and the House budget takes those cuts even further. If they had their way, low-income children would be left more hungry, in less stable home environments, and the number of Americans without health insurance would rise, and the most vulnerable families in our country would be put at greater risk. I don't think that's fair or right. These are exactly the kinds of programs that are critical for our children, especially those who are hit hardest by the economic recession. Now, while I share many of our colleagues' goal of reducing our debt and deficit and reducing our debt to GDP ratio over the next 10 years, I do not share their beliefs that indiscriminate cuts are the answer. We can't ask our children, especially our most vulnerable children, to bear the burden of our spending cuts. The decisions that we make today about our federal budget policy will have huge impacts on the next generation. And to make the right choices for our children, I feel very strongly we've got to stop lurching from crisis to crisis. The managing of our budget policy by crisis has not worked. It needs to end, and that's especially true when it comes to decisions that impact our kids. We should not have to wait here in Congress until the last minute to sit down at the table, find common ground, and work something out. And that is exactly, and that is why now that the House has passed their budget, the Senate has passed ours, Democrats have now gone to the floor 14 times to ask consent to go to conference so we can work out our differences and come to a deal. Democrats are willing to make some tough decisions to find savings across the federal budget, as long as it is done responsibly and fairly. If we end up headed towards another manufactured crisis this fall, the situation is only going to be made worse for our children and grandchildren. As a mother and a proud grandmother, I know that I want to leave my kids and grandkids a better country than the one I received. We owe it to all our children to come together to find some fair solutions that help our economy grow and tackle our deficit and debt responsibly. Solutions that call for responsible, sustainable spending cuts and that call on those who can afford it most to pay their fair share. America has always been a country that strives to build a stronger country for the next generation through investments in infrastructure and innovation and education and research. We know our future will be defined by the scientists who come out of our schools, by the businesses that we create, and the technologies that we invent. And that starts with investing in our children. And at the very least, right now, it starts with replacing sequestration and reversing the devastating cuts that are hurting children across the country as we speak. So I look forward today to hearing from our witnesses about this important subject, and I really do appreciate all of you coming here to testify.